Imagine waking up and seeing the headline, Canada becomes the 51st US state. Sounds absurd, right? Well, recently, Donald Trump joked about just that, calling Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau the governor of the great state of Canada. But behind the humor lies something bigger. Trade wars, tariffs, and economic impacts that could hit both Canada and the US hard. Today, we're breaking down what's really happening and why this matters to your everyday life. Stay with me to understand how this joke ties into serious trade decisions and rising costs you might not even see coming. So, let's start with what happened. A few weeks ago, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sat down for dinner with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. During that dinner, Trump reportedly joked that Canada could just become the United States' 51st state. Now, on its own, that sounds like typical Trump humor, off the cuff, exaggerated, maybe meant to lighten the mood. But he didn't stop there. A few days later, Trump posted an edited image of himself on a mountaintop next to a Canadian flag with the caption, "Oh Canada." And then, in his latest post, he referred to Trudeau as Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada. Now, of course, Canada isn't a US state. It's a sovereign country. But the phrasing caught on, and people started talking about it. Some laughed it off, others saw it as trolling, and a few even wondered, is there a point behind this? And here's the thing. Trump's comments come at a time when there's already tension simmering between the US and Canada. Specifically, Trump has promised to impose a 25% tariff on Canadian imports when he takes office. That's a big deal. Why? Because Canada's economy relies heavily on exports to the United States. We're talking oil, autos, steel, agriculture, you name it. In fact, nearly 75% of Canada's exports go to the US. A tariff that's steep could hit Canada hard and might even push their economy into a recession. So, is Trump just joking when he calls Canada a state? Or is he sending a message? Well, this is where it gets interesting. Trump has a long history of using trade deficits to justify tariffs. You've probably heard him talk about how the US loses money to other countries through trade. And in this case, he claims that the US subsidizes Canada. He's even floated the idea that if countries benefit so much from trade with America, maybe they should just become part of the US. The problem is this reasoning is a bit flawed. Trade deficits don't mean one country is subsidizing another. It just means that one country imports more goods than it exports. For example, if the US buys a lot of Canadian oil, but Canada doesn't buy as much in return, that's a trade deficit. But it's not a subsidy, and it's not inherently bad. Trade is a two-way street, and both sides usually benefit. You see, Canada and the US share one of the largest trading relationships in the world, almost $1 trillion annually. Think about that. Every day, goods, services, and people flow back and forth across the border, fueling businesses, creating jobs, and keeping prices stable. So if Trump follows through on his tariff threat, it's not just Canada that would suffer. American businesses and consumers would feel the impact, too. So let's break that down. Say Trump imposes the 25% tariff. Canada might retaliate, as they've done before. During Trump's first term, when he slapped tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, Canada responded by targeting specific US goods. Things like bourbon from Kentucky, motorcycles from Wisconsin, even ketchup. And it worked. Those tariffs hurt industries in key US states, putting pressure on American lawmakers to push back. This time, Canada could do something similar. Trudeau has already said that Canada is looking at the right ways to respond, and that retaliatory tariffs are on the table. The goal here isn't just revenge. It's about making Americans realize that tariffs raise prices on both sides of the border. So if you're an American consumer buying cars, appliances, or groceries, those tariffs could make everyday items more expensive. So then, what does this mean for you? If you're in Canada, the stakes are clear. A tariff this big could hit jobs, businesses, and the overall economy. And if you're in the US, it's a reminder that tariffs aren't just a foreign problem. They have real consequences for American industries, jobs, and families. Now, the other side of this is the political angle. Trump's comments and his relationship with Trudeau are part of a larger story. You might remember that back in 2018, Trump called Trudeau very dishonest and weak after a G7 summit. And recently, Trudeau's approval ratings have been slipping. So when Trump throws out phrases like Governor of Canada, it can play into domestic politics both in the US and in Canada. For example, some Canadian politicians, like Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, are already using Trump's remarks to criticize Trudeau's leadership. But here's the bottom line: this isn't just about jokes or social media posts. Trump's comments about Canada being a state highlight some serious issues like trade policies, economic ties, and how two close allies navigate their differences. Whether you live in the US or Canada, this matters because the decisions made in Washington and Ottawa affect us all. And while we can chuckle at the idea of Canada becoming the 51st state, that's obviously not going to happen. It's still worth paying attention to what's really going on here. Tariffs, trade relationships, and political tensions are complex, but they impact the price of the things we buy, the jobs we depend on, and the economies we live in. So, what do you think? Is Trump just trolling Canada, or is there more to it? And how do you feel about the possibility of these tariffs? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts and get a conversation going. And hey, if you found this discussion helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and share this with someone who might find it interesting. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.